Schnell. That was Irma Grese. My name's Kevin, and this is History Goon. If you look in your dictionary between the words cunning and cup, there's a word that I could use to describe this person, but I'm not going to, because I know I have female listeners that wouldn't like to hear me say that word. And also, my mother would appear like a fog and beat me with a shoe if I said that word out loud. But anyway, that word is pretty well descriptive for the woman that we're about to talk about. This week, we are talking about Irma Grese. And it's great right from the beginning. Irma Ilse Ida Grese came slithering forth from her mother's nethers October 7th, 1923, in the town of Feldberger Seenlandschaft, which is the northeastern corner of Germany, about 135 kilometers north of Berlin. She was the third of five, born to Alfred and Berta. Her childhood was fairly normal, according to most people. One of her sisters recalled her doing poorly in school and being kind of a bitch, causing trouble but not handling it herself. But so she would cause a ruckus and then get one of her older siblings to handle it. Which I know a guy that maybe did that in high school once or twice. He's been on here before. Looks an awful lot like me. This is pretty common, obviously. We all had friends or siblings growing up that would cause trouble and then have you deal with it instead of them because they didn't want to. The first little bit of disaster in her life happened in 1936 when the truth about her father came out, that he had been messing around with the daughter of a local bar owner. Mom, Berta, being a rational woman, handled it very well. She took the kids, she filed for divorce, went through the courts. I'm kidding. Of course I'm kidding. She drank a glass of hydrochloric acid and hung around long enough to be found by Alfred and the kids before checking out. Irma was 13 years old when she found her mother twitching on the floor, and this was part of a turning point in her life, believe it or not. Maybe this is a crossing of the Rubicon, if you will, because this is not something that she's going to come back from normal. According to some stuff, there was some speculation that mom and dad may have been abusive to the kids, like physically, emotionally, mentally. I mean, she was born in the 20s, probably pretty like boilerplate stuff, but none of the other kids turned out the way she did. Was there obviously some emotional or verbal abuse? Probably. It's Germany in the 1920s. It's just, if your grandparents or great-grandparents are still alive, ask them what it was like if they got out of line when they were kids. Hell, if you're my age, ask your parents what it was like when they got out of line as kids. My grandfather made me cut my own switch once, and I'm not 40 yet. So put it that way. But seeing your mother flopping around on the floor with bloody foam roiling out of her mouth will probably change you as a person. And it all happened at kind of a formative age in her life. Obviously she's going through changes and all that would lead to her dropping out of school and starting her rebellious stage a little bit early, let's call it. In case you haven't figured out where we're going yet, she's born in the early 20s in Germany, and she's a dickhead. So at this point in time, we find ourselves in 1936 Germany. Hitler's been chancellor for a few years at this point. He's pooched to the beer hall a few years previously, and everything is coming up swastikas for old Hitler. He's about to have a great time. Things are really going his way right now. I know that the time between World War I and World War II was pretty rocky and not good for Germans in general. Um, they'd been through like 21 different governments that had been installed and removed between 1919 and 1932. Um, and the big one took over in 1933 with the National Socialist Party, or obviously the Nazis, if you're not familiar. Um, but that time period between World War I and World War II, the German economy was so bad that if you got paid in the morning, by the time you got out of work, you didn't have enough money to buy bread because the Deutschmarks were so devalued because they had printed so many of them that it was like what the hell was it? It was like 20,000 marks for a loaf of bread because it wasn't worth the money it was printed on. Believe it or not, women played a fairly large part in the different governments, and not surprisingly, they fell right into all of the awful things that the Nazis started and supported. Another big thing to remember with this particular scumbag we're talking about is she was born the year of the Beer Hall Putsch, so she never really knew a time where Germany wasn't kind of in turmoil for the most part. As Hitler came into power, the Nazi ideals became more of a day-to-day thing. Regular people, including children, were indoctrinated daily into the system, obviously. Spoiler alert, this is a pretty bad time in history, if we haven't remembered. Pertaining to the kids in particular, the Fuhrer banned all youth organizations, including organized sports, and replaced them with, quote, the Youth Corps, made up of the Hitler Youth, which he modeled off of the Boy Scouts of America, and the Bund Deutscher, the League of German Girls. Irma, being young and wanting to help the fatherland any way possible, joined the League of German Girls at 16. This is after she ran away from home, after she dropped out of school. So she's working on a farm for a bit, completing her mandatory time of Landfrauhaar, which is land service, which I know I didn't say that right because we won World War II, so I don't have to know how to speak German. And she worked in a shop for a while before joining. Keep in mind, it was compulsory to join these groups starting at the age of 10, and any child that met the, quote, standard of being ethnically German, a German citizen, and free of any hereditary disease, quote unquote, hereditary disease for obvious reasoning. These kids would often meet for campfires and cultural education, such as folklore, sports, and training. Now, obviously, Hitler and the Nazis did some absolutely horrendous, right? There is no denying that, and I'm not defending anything he did. One of the cool things he did was this program that he started for families. So basically, if you were a married couple, you could borrow however much to buy a house, call it $10,000, whatever. If you had kids after you bought your house, they would knock money off for each child that you had. And then eventually, after like 4 or 5 years, if you were in good standing with the bank on your payments and your kids are in school and all that, they just cleared the debt, which is wild to think about. I could be wrong in exactly how that worked, but it's very similar in that vein of how things were. He did a number on fixing their economy before World War II, which I know it sounds weird to say something nice about the guy, but he fixed the completely broken economy that was Germany. Like, the money was actually worth something again. You could buy a house, you could open a business, you could do all this other stuff that 10 years before you couldn't have done. So, yes, he's an evil, evil piece of scumbag. So the training between the Hitler Youth and the Girls League is pretty different. The boys would be trained in like survival skills, mechanics, light combat stuff, Boy Scouts things, you know. Um, when I was in Boy Scouts, we didn't do any combatives. Would have been kind of cool though. We just learned how to tie knots and do woodworking and have my dad yell at the scout leader because he didn't know what the hell he was doing. Um, then I stopped going to Boy Scouts because my dad was like, this guy's an idiot and he's going to get somebody hurt because we were doing stupid that, he didn't know what the hell he was doing. Anyway, so where the boys are doing that, the girls are being trained more in homemaking, learning how to avoid Rosenschrad or racial defilement, which to me means they were taught how to spot Jews and not have sex with them. I could be completely wrong. That's kind of what I picked up on that. Irma joins up because she knew that it would royally piss her father off. Yes, he was a party guy. His membership was more out of fear than love for the Nazi party. He described her as, quote, a solemn conservative church-going child, and it made him sad to see her join with such interest. Obviously. Now, we kind of have to jump back a little bit. Well, in the BDM, which is the girls' league, she showed a lot of interest in becoming a nurse, and at the age of 18, she got what she wanted and was assigned to Hohenleichen. This place was special. It was a sanatorium run by the SS. Here, she worked pretty closely with Dr. Karl Gebhardt as an assistant. Most people agree that she never made it to the level of nurse because she wasn't particularly bright. But she was an extra set of hands during procedures that Gebhardt was carrying out, including bone grafting, which bone grafting is basically a bone transplant, usually to fix or replace damaged or diseased bone. And I am fairly confident that since this guy was the personal physician to Heinrich Himmler, he wasn't doing anything to make the lives better for people in the hospital. And he was definitely not helping certain people out. Matter of fact, they may have been medical supplies. You're picking up what I'm laying down. After a few months at the sanatorium, her supervisor had her reassigned to the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she would train as part of the female SS auxiliary. Ravensbrück was the first camp commissioned as a female-only camp by Heinrich Himmler, and for a while it wasn't necessarily, awful, except for the fact that it was overcrowded. That changed pretty quickly, though, and they would solve that overcrowding problem by turning it into a quote-unquote extermination through work camp. The largest contingent of women here were Poles, and they fell victim to the same kind of awful thing that would be common elsewhere, being worked to death, having medical experimentation and mass liquidations done. The gas chambers at the camp were constructed in 1944. At its height, anywhere from 80 to 100 women were dying a day just as a result of being worked to death. That doesn't include, obviously, sickness or somebody just having a bad day and deciding to grab, I don't know, this entire building full of people and going, think we're done with you, and shipping them off to the chambers. Or potentially saying, hey, we just got a contract with BMW or Audi or Porsche, and they need workers because, believe it or not, all those companies back then, a lot of their workforce was coming from these camps. So think about that. The next time, my favorite thing, and I know people will be pissed off with me for this because I think it's hilarious. I remember a while ago, when Elon Musk first was like, yeah, Trump's pretty cool or whatever. I can't remember her name. There was some celebrity. It's like, I'm getting rid of my Tesla because I don't want a car that's being manufactured by a Nazi. And then she got a Volkswagen, which the irony there is just restaurant quality because, Volkswagen was created by Adolf Hitler during the 30s for affordable cars for the Germans. Um, Another fun fact, the old Volkswagen Beetles, if you got one from like the 40s or 50s where they hadn't changed their manufacturing stuff all that much, the suspension on it would be the driver's side here. The suspensions were built more sturdily because at one point in time, they were designed to have an arm attached to the bottom that would come up outside the window that you could attach an MG42 or an MG34 to, because they were going to be used as homeland defense vehicles. So you could have just attached this arm that you probably could have found somewhere on eBay or something to your Volkswagen. And then if you had like more money than you know what to do with, you could have found an MG42 and just attached this thing to a Volkswagen Beetle and just gone to one of these like crazy ass shooting ranges where they've got tanks and stuff and just had blast. God, that would have been cool. I had 2 old Volkswagen Beetles and I didn't know anything about that until after I got rid of them. Anyway, back to this uplifting story. The female guards at Ravensbrück numbered 150 at the most, and they were responsible for the deaths of 50,000 individuals between working, disease, starvation, and then gassing another estimate of about 2,200 people. Ravensbrück was used basically as a training camp for female guards. So she became a guard or an overseer, whatever you want to call them. Did a bunch of training under a woman named Dorothea Binz. This miserable was the Oberhausführerin of the camp. And so she is the head female guard of this camp. And she's also in charge of all the training for the female guards. She would walk around the camp with a whip in one hand and a German Shepherd leash in the other, arbitrarily selecting prisoners at random to be sent to the gas chamber or just straight up executed on the spot. Thankfully, spoiler alert, at the end of the war, this disgusting human being was hanged by the neck until she was dead by the Allies. Good. In honor of her trainer, Irma would get her own dog in whip combo, and she also mixed in some good old-fashioned heavy kicking boots, because you gotta take care of business every once in a while, you know? In March of 1943, she gets called up to the big leagues, and she is reassigned to Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is in Poland, as a telephone operator and part of the gardening crew. I hate everything about this person. On the way there, she decides to stop at home and visit dear old dad for a couple of days. She shows up in full SS gear, and her dad was less than pleased with this, and he beat the crap out of her and told her to never come home again. Spoiler alert. That's what we call foreshadowing. Obviously, I am not one for hitting women, but if any woman ever deserved to get punched in the mouth, Exhibit A. She became the youngest female guard at Auschwitz at the age of 19. The average for male or female was 26. But the youngest ever recorded guard at a camp came at the Grosso Rosen, where a 15-year-old boy was running guard duty, which, 15 years old, I shouldn't have been allowed to run a deep fryer, but I was. She showed up within days of the 4 massive crematoriums being finished. This was the kind of the jewel in the crown of the Nazi extermination machine. The first prisoners rolled through the doors in May of 1940, and within a month, the first mass transport came in. I actually didn't realize how big this facility actually was. It's not one camp. It's made up of like 45 or 50 satellite areas. And it was unfortunately the workhorse of the system, as well as there was somewhere around 1 million people that entered the gates and never came out of Auschwitz. ADD break. Had to do a little ADD break because I couldn't remember exactly how it was worded, but when they walked through the gates at Auschwitz, there was a saying over it. It was Arbeit macht frei, which translates to work makes you free. Except it didn't. Yeah, this was pretty rough. In May of 1944, she was promoted to Oberaufseherin, given command of the Birkenau B2-C camp, which would be the unfortunately temporary home of 30,000 prisoners. Prisoners that survived all said the same thing. She was like uncommonly cruel. Like for a Nazi, she was pretty bad. She had this like tendency to find women who were gifted in the chest and target them. Any infraction would result in her stripping them down and whipping them across the breast, specifically the nipples, which, yikes. One prisoner said this, quote, "The women had learned to dread her attention, the least of which meant being lashed across the nipples," which, ouch. Here's another gross thing. When these women were given medical attention, it was by an inmate doctor. That's not gross. Because honestly, these are probably going to take care of them better to the best of their ability versus the camp doctors. But there was a woman there who was a doctor that just happened to also be a prisoner. Of course, she wasn't given what she really needed to fix these women up after they've been whipped and beaten. You know, little things like clean instruments or antiseptic materials or anesthesia, or anything like that. Gisela Pearl, the inmate doctor, said this, quote, "I happened to look up and saw a horrible sight that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Irma Grese was enjoying the sight of this human suffering. Her tense body swayed back and forth in a rhythmic motion. Her cheeks were flushed and her wide open eyes had the staring look of complete sexual paroxysm. She also came to watch the operations of the women whose breasts had been sliced open and infected with bacteria and lice that were all over the camp. Irma Grese always arrived and would kick the patient if their screams interrupted her pleasure. She would often shake in an orgasmic fashion with saliva running from the corners of her mouth." That's one of the grossest things that I've ever read. Like, in general, not just on here. That's one of the grosser things that I've ever had the pleasure of my eyeballs seeing. The inmates were forced to walk 10 miles every morning for work detail, while Irma rode her bike with her German Shepherd in tow. Yeah, she's a miserable person. Ugh. Ick. She also enjoyed letting her dogs work. One inmate recalled a day where, pushing a cart full of rocks back, they lost control of the wagon and it went down the hill and tipped over. Irma turned the dogs loose on these prisoners. One mauled a Polish girl and the other grabbed a Russian woman. She then got close enough to see what the dogs were doing, and seeing them tear the girls up got her all kinds of hot and bothered. She also described Irma as having, quote, "an angel face and snake eyes," which is super creepy. But you'll see pictures of her. If you're watching this on Spotify or on YouTube, I will have pictures of this psychopath. She's like a 4 at best. I mean, so am I, but still, like, I've seen more attractive war criminals than her. Oh God, I'm just trying to have a little bit of fun because this is going to get so much worse. Oh God, especially right here. She would also single out pregnant women. Her favorite thing to do here was to wait until the woman was going into labor and then tie her legs together. This would obviously make the already incredibly painful process of childbirth even worse, for mother and child alike. Not for her. She absolutely loved this. Irma really liked to keep herself looking good, and she would often wear really nice jewelry and expensive perfume and then walk by inmates really closely so that they could experience her. Quote, "After the war, I'm going to be in films. You'll see my name in the lights." And that's something she said to some of these inmates. Um, she also drew the attention of other Nazis, including the camp commandant, Josef Kramer, and the chief surgeon at Auschwitz, Josef Mengele. She actually spent quite a bit of time with the Angel of Death, helping him select prisoners to operate on. Um, she also had a tendency to randomly have sex with other guards, and even some of the prisoners, male and female, it did not matter. Um, with the prisoners, though, she did something really weird where she would tell them before they started doing anything that they weren't Jewish. Probably more for her own mental benefit than theirs. Um, she at one point got pregnant, and who knows from one of the guards, one of the prisoners from Mengele himself, because they had a thing going. And she ends up getting an abortion, which was illegal at the time in Germany. So she went to that inmate, Dr. Pearl, to have it done because they were already criminals, right? They're already in prison. So she can't be tried for it because she's already in prison. When Pearl objected on not just legal but also moral grounds, Irma forced her to give her an abortion at gunpoint. Find somewhere in your brain to picture that without immediately just going, huh. Come January of 1945, the Soviets start closing in on the camp, so everybody was evacuated, and Irma goes back to Ravensbrück. She's there for a few months before she would be sent to Bergen and Belsen, which is in Germany, which is also another absolute horror show. And here, she somehow got even worse. The end of the war is on the horizon, food is running out, and she would intentionally leave potato peels laying around on the ground. She would creep off and hide and wait for inmates to come by and try to pick these potato peels up because, I mean, they might not have eaten, in a couple of days. They're probably a little hungry. So she's waiting for them to pick them up to eat them. And then she would just kind of leap out of the shadows and grab them. And obviously, because you're stealing from the military, you're going to face punishment for that. She would also make prisoners hold large rocks over their heads during roll call and force inmates to stand in the snow for hours at a time in no shoes. Nice lady. Anyone that was unable to complete this task would be beaten unconscious by either her or Josef Kramer, the commandant, who was usually there with her. They even had a cute little couple's nickname at this point. They were called the Beasts of Belsen, even though they were there for less than a month. So they really got their reputation pretty quick. April 15th, 1945, the Brits showed up and took the camp. God bless the British, She was one of about 50 SS members that didn't run away. As the Brits are going through the camp, they're going through stuff, and she is berating them for going into areas that she has deemed off limits to them. So some of the British soldiers found it a little off-putting that she was still being like this while she was in shackles and being held at gunpoint, basically. And after a while of her yelling at these guys, they basically told her to shut the up and forced her at gunpoint to help bury the bodies. A journalist attached to the British Army asked her why she would help commit these atrocities, and she said, quote, "It was our duty to exterminate antisocial elements so that Germany's future would be safe. I was only following orders." Over a year later, she is still in prison when she and about 20 other guards are tried for, war crimes. And crimes against humanity, general stuff like that. Um, one of them said that her biggest worry during the trial was that she wanted to make sure she looked good. That C word, man. It's right there, and I really want to say it, but I'm not going to. Uh, when it came down to her turn, she pulled the it's just following orders thing that everybody else tried. She and two other female guards were sentenced to death. She appealed her conviction to British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who in my script I have in brackets after that, incompetent boob, because he was. I'll have to cover him at some point in time because he was just terrible. Yeah, he was the head of the British military during World War II. He was a buffoon. Um, he basically told her to kick rocks and suck down another tea and whiskey. The night before her execution, her and other female guards, including another giant douchebag, Elizabeth Volkenroth, spent the night singing Nazi songs. She was led to the gallows the next morning, December 13th, 1945, as an early Christmas present. She had a noose placed around her neck. And when she stood there, she looked at the executioner and she said, Schnell, or quickly in German. The door dropped and so did she. This part makes me really happy. She flailed and thrashed for 21 minutes before she finally died. Because it seems like she didn't weigh enough for the fall to break her neck. And she just kind of swung around and strangled to death. Which,
oh no! Anyway,
Irma Grese holds the distinction and honor of being the youngest Nazi war criminal to be executed. She died at 22 years old. So, this is a quick episode. Or is it? Because if you were worried that this may be the only female Nazi that I could have dug up, fear not. I still have Ilse Koch, who earned the nickname the Bitch of Buchenwald. So let's talk about her, shall we? Ilse Koch was hatched or spawned or however people like her are born September 22nd, 1906 in Dresden, Saxony. Her old man was a commander in the military and her mother was a homemaker. And little Ilse was a well-mannered child. And at the age of 15, she started at a specialized school for accounting. She's got a great opportunity to not be an asshole for the rest of her life. She's got a job lined up. She's got a career. I mean, accounting's not exciting. It's not sexy, but it'll make you money. And with the state of the German economy after World War I, you're going to stay busy as an accountant. These are the days of the Weimar Republic, where people would literally take wheelbarrows of money into town to buy loaves of bread or newspapers because the money was worth less than the paper it was printed on. The 1930s roll around, and guess where we're back to? Because we've already mentioned this part. It's time to party. It's Nazi party time. She joined up in 1932 with a bunch of her friends and other young, disillusioned Germans wanting a change. They thought the new up-and-coming, soon-to-be Chancellor Adolf Hitler would be the guy to bring that change around. He definitely wanted to bring a change, but it was more of a demographic change. Less gypsies, blacks, handicaps, and of course, Jews. The plan was to turn the German people of the Weimar government, which the Nazis blamed for losing World War I, and a big talking point was getting out of the Treaty of Versailles, which gutted the German military after World War I. The Germans, realistically, at the end of World War I, the Germans got it worse than anybody else because their economy and government were a complete disaster. They weren't allowed to have a military. I think their police force was even kind of scaled down quite a bit. And, I mean, they didn't start the war, but unfortunately for them, they were good at fighting. And that's why they lost so much after World War I. Had they been like Serbia or Bulgaria, whatever, they would have been fine. Not so much the Ottoman Empire, though, because they kind of died at the end of World War One and became Turkey. And we already talked about a scumbag from Turkey during World War One. If you go back to episode 6, I think, when we did Soghomon Talarian and Talat Pasha. Man, now that's a genocide that doesn't get talked about enough. Because the Armenians got, and nobody cares. So, all of that, kind of a long-winded way to say that in 1936, she met her husband, the light of her life, the wind beneath her wings, Karl Otto Koch. This piece of dog was a colonel in the SS and a card-carrying party member, obviously. Most people have the common misconception that, all German soldiers were Nazis, which is definitely not the case. Most of the guys in the Wehrmacht were just dudes that just so happened to have lived in Germany that were drafted to go fight, which is why you'll see, if you're lucky enough to find videos of like Americans or Brits that fought during World War II, where they get a chance to go back to like France or Germany and they meet up with a guy who fought in the Wehrmacht, they can sit there and have a conversation because they had way more in common than they would have liked to admit back then. Because most of these were just kids. They were guys that, 18, 19 years old, that one day they're working the farm, they're out hunting and fishing, and the next day they're fighting somebody that they don't know. Because someone 1,000 miles away told them, you have to go kill this guy. When, again, they had a lot in common because they were just dudes. There's a lot of stories of Americans of German descent that went back and fought in Germany because they felt like ancestrally they had to go and fight for their, ancestors' homeland. Really cool instance with that is in Band of Brothers, where Malarkey's walking down the thing and he's like, they've got all the German prisoners off to the side. He's like, "Where are you from, son?" And he's just kind of like joking, nothing, and the guy's going to understand him. And he goes, "Eugene, Oregon." He goes, "What?" And then just goes back and talks to him and realizes that, at one point in time, they didn't live all that far away from each other, and they probably knew some of the same people. And then Spears may or may not have offered them cigarettes. If you've watched Band of Brothers, you'll get that reference because, oh boy. Now that's a guy. That's a motherfucker I got to cover is Ronald Spears because, out of his mind, but in a good way. So again, just like not, it's war is not black and white. There's a lot of gray areas, especially with the people that you run into, where again, these guys had a lot in common with each other. Who they didn't have a lot in common with were the SS, who absolutely were, no questions asked, Nazis. And another thing to mention here, getting back on track, because I've, again, digressed, as I tend to. So getting back to Karl here, her wonderful, loving husband, not only is he a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party, not only is he like high up in the military, he's also the commandant of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. This was one of the big ones. This is built about 20 miles from Germany. Sachsenhausen's first great influx of prisoners began after Kristallnacht in 1938, which that's a whole thing that we're not going to get into right now because that'd be like its own episode because that was pretty not good. So that was in November of 1938. About 10,000 Jews were rounded up from Berlin, Hamburg, Mecklenburg, and Pomerania and transported to Sachsenhausen. Within a few hours of them arriving, about 450 of them were murdered, like outright. Just you go left, you go left, you go right, you go left, and then surprise, it's machine guns. At first, those who could find passage out of the country were eligible for release, which is another kind of a fuzzy area with World War II, because there was a thing before the war started where I believe it was called the Havara Agreement, where Hitler was actually trying to get Jewish people to move out of Germany on under their own will. Like they were going to go, I don't remember where it was, but they were going to be allowed to take all of their money, um, all their possessions and all that stuff. And like even their bank accounts would transfer over to wherever this was being set up. Which is why I think that's part of why here, particularly, if they were able to get out of the country, they were eligible to get out of the prison. I think it was all part of that. I could be wrong. Again, I am not by any stretch of the imagination an actual historian. I am a history enthusiast. If I was an actual historian, I would be making probably more money, or a teacher or something. But anyway, that's another very weird area where if you start looking into it, you're going to end up with people like, oh, this guy hates Jews. They're like, no, it's just a thing that I found that I'm trying to see what the f it's about. The camp's inmate population fluctuated between about 11,000 and, a couple more than that, about 48,000 during World War II. Of the roughly 200,000 prisoners who passed through the walls of Sachsenhausen, over 100,000 died, mainly from disease. Not as many from execution or being eliminated, because I think it's another thing with with the concentration camps that gets overshadowed, is how many people actually died in the gas chambers or being put in the incinerators. How many of them died like that versus how many died from disease and lack of hygiene? Because you pack that many people into one spot and you can't keep up on the upkeep of it. You're going to have human waste everywhere. You're going to have food rotting. Obviously, you've got corpses. So diseases were rampant through most of these camps. So yes, a lot of people died. Don't get me wrong. An unimaginable number of people died in concentration camps in World War II. But it seems like the numbers of, dead from disease and numbers of executed sometimes get flip-flopped, just depending on the source. I mean, it's evil either way, so it doesn't really matter which way it happened. But the fact that these people were dying of diseases doesn't get as much attention as the fact of oh, they were just running them through, gas chambers, which is terrible, obviously. I'm not I'm not in favor of either one. But yeah, I'm just telling history how it is, unfortunately. And again, this is another big one that they were shipping people off to armament factories to build mortar shells, artillery. They're being shipped off to manufacturers to build tanks and half tracks and planes and stuff like that. Because again, all of these companies, why are we going to pay people to come in and work when we can just get free labor? And then when they're gone, we can just, revolving door and get more in here. A gas chamber was added to the crematorium complex in 1943. And again, this one was one of the weird ones because it was only used under special orders. So it wasn't like we just turned it on in the morning, ship people through it, and then turn it off at night. They would only run it very specifically, which again doesn't make it any better. In 1937, the Kochs were transferred to Buchenwald. The iron gate that leads into the camp at Buchenwald reads, Jedem das Seine, which literally translates to each his own. But it was intended as a message to the prisoners of basically everyone gets what they deserve. some people didn't get as much as they deserved, like the guards and stuff like that. But Ilse Koch jumped at the opportunity to become involved in her husband's work. And over the next few years, she gained a reputation for being one of the most feared Nazis at Buchenwald. And that's saying something, because there's a lot of terrible people here. Her first order of business was to use money that was stolen from prisoners to construct a $62,500, or adjusted for inflation, around $1.5 million today, indoor sports arena so she could ride her horses. Because everybody's got to have a hobby. You can't just, yeah, you can enjoy your work, but what are you going to do outside of there? You going to have any fun? Koch would often take her pastime outside the arena and into the camp itself, where she would taunt prisoners until they looked at her, and at which point in time she would crack them in the face with a riding crop, which if you've ever picked up a riding crop, those are stiff. Those hurt. Survivors of the camp recalled later during her trial for war crimes that she always seemed to be particularly excited about sending children to the gas chamber. Her other hobby, which would later become a major point of contention during the Nuremberg trials, which, again, foreshadowing, was her collections that she had scattered around of lampshades and book covers and gloves, which were all allegedly made of soft, supple gypsy and Jew skin. Well, this is one of the women that, again, I'm not the true crime guy here, but this is one of the women that Ed Gein read a bunch of books about and was like, "I'm gonna make me a nipple belt." Mm-hmm. I don't know why I went sling blade with him, but he looks like French fried potatoes kind of guy. Witnesses later recalled that Ilse Koch even took her horseback rides through the camp to scout out prisoners who had distinctive tattoos. Obviously not the ones that were installed when they got there. Fun fact, the numbering machine that they used to keep track of these folks to tattoo them was developed, designed, and built by IBM, whose headquarters are about an hour and 20 minutes north of me. And they were at the time, too. So, yeah, thanks, guys. The prisoners would be stripped of their skin before being incinerated, and Koch allegedly kept the skin on display in her home with the commandant. These artifacts were recovered after the camp's liberation and served as key evidence during her trial. Oh, that's so gross to think about. Like, yeah, there's pictures out there of like Yakuza guys that have said, like, when I die, I want my skin removed and preserved because my tattoos are awesome. And you can actually find those pictures. They're gross, but they're out there. But this was just... These people are sick. Just... Her and her husband were arrested on August 24th, 1943 at Buchenwald, in this order, on charges of embezzlement and then murdering of prisoners. Despite the Nazis' mass murder of prisoners and their torturous, evil medical experiments, they even found what she was doing, quote unquote, distasteful. I mean, even though a lot of this stuff has been cleared by the head office, they're like, whatever, it's just prisoners, who really cares? So it's been cleared by the main office in Orenburg. The Kochs are acting on their own accord, which is not cool with the Nazis. They were very big on chain of command and following orders, as we've mentioned earlier this episode. It's also alleged that Commandant Koch had ordered the execution of the orderly that diagnosed him and treated him for syphilis, so that secret would never be revealed. Frau Koch, in the meantime, had taken several lovers at Buchenwald, and it was widely accepted that her marriage to the commandant had been a very, very open one. Well, Commandant Koch was sentenced to death just a week before Buchenwald was liberated. Frau Koch, on the other hand, was acquitted, mostly due to lack of evidence, specifically that investigators could not prove the lampshades and other items were actually made from human skin. It's a technicality, right? She, to defend herself, insisted that they were made of goat skin, which maybe. Not a lot of goats with tattoos, though. Following the camp's liberation in 1945, word began to travel about Frau Koch's sadistic involvement. Survivors recalled everything in interviews. The public pressured the courts to bring her to trial again. Ilse Koch was brought before the General Military Government Court for the trial of war criminals in 1947, which was Nuremberg. On the stand, she announced that she was 8 months pregnant, which came as a shock for two reasons. Firstly, she had had no contact with any men except for American interpreters, many of whom were Jewish, before her trial. And secondly, she was 41 years old, which I believe at that point they would refer to that as a geriatric pregnancy. And a lot of those are kind of iffy, kind of hit or miss whether you're going to have complications or not. Despite her pregnancy, she was charged with, quote, participating in the criminal plan for aiding, abetting, and participating in the murders at Buchenwald, and sentenced to life in prison for, quote, violations of the law and customs of war. So before this, she'd had one son with Commandant Koch before they were arrested, and the second child, whose father is unknown, was born while she was in prison. Both of her children went to foster homes. Probably for the best. 2 years after her conviction, her sentence was reduced to 4 years by General Lucius D. Clay, the interim military governor of the American zone in Germany. According to Clay, the reduction came since, quote, there was no convincing evidence that she had selected inmates for extermination in order to secure tattooed skin or that she possessed any articles made of human skin. She's still a war criminal, dude. Like, yeah, she didn't have anything made out of skin. She just ordered, like, I don't know, 50 to 60,000 deaths, but, I mean, she wasn't weird about it. The court maintained that perhaps the items had been made of goat skin, and she was released. However, the general stated, quote, I hold no sympathy for Ilse Koch. She was a woman of depraved character and ill repute. She had done many things reprehensible and punishable, undoubtedly, under German law. We were not trying her for those things. We were trying her as a war criminal on specific charges. Four of the witnesses testified that they had seen Koch selecting prisoners specifically for their tattoos, or that they had seen or been involved in the manufacturing of human skin lampshades. So again, like before, due to lack of evidence, the charges are eventually dropped. On January 15th, 1951, the court gave its verdict in a 111-page decision. Koch was not present. She was convicted of, quote, charges of incitement of murder, incitement to attempted murder, and incitement to the crime of committing grievous bodily harm, and again sentenced to life imprisonment with permanent forfeiture of any civil rights. During her time in prison, she petitioned for appeals several times, but was always dismissed. Thank God. She even protested to the International Human Rights Commission, but was rejected, which, again, restaurant quality irony, going to the Human Rights Commission when you've been tried for human rights violations. But for violating my human rights, well, you did that with, like, I don't know, 500,000 people. While in prison, her son, who had been conceived during her imprisonment at Dachau, discovered that she was his mother. He came to visit her in prison pretty often over the next several years. On September 1st, 1967, Ilse Koch died peacefully in her cell after she hung herself. Um, the next day, her son arrived for their regular planned visit and was shocked to find that his mother had died because nobody bothered to call and be like, "Hey, your mom killed herself. Sorry, homie," and like hung up. Um, then she was buried in an unmarked grave at an unattended prisoner ceremony. So, man, oh man, what a time! I really enjoyed our time together talking about Nazi war criminals. Oh my god, they're like comically evil. I mean, and like the big names that everybody knows from like being Nazi war criminals are the ones that were like paper pushers that were like in administration or overseeing things. Not often do you really dig deep and find the people that were boots on the ground just really getting in there and being scumbags in person. Um, I've got a couple more of those too, unfortunately, uh, that were just horrible people. But yeah, on a scale to 1 to 10, these women, they were awful. Um, and again, you don't really think of women when you think Nazi war criminals. You think guys with giant face scars and little mustaches and whatnot. You don't think of, you know, someone that looks like a girl you went to school with, or someone that could look like your aunt. Who knows? You don't think about that. You don't think about like some sweet old lady that's just one day she's baking bread and the next day she's hitting people in the face with a riding crop and then selecting them to be executed. Um, anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, what's wrong with you? um, but you can go over to Patreon, patreon.com/1159 media. We'll get you early access to History Goon with me. You get your early access to Guestnicity with Luther. You get your early access to Almost Fiction with Chase. It'll get you early access to 911 calls with the operator, surprisingly with the operator. It'll get you early access and backdoor access to Guestnicity. Which I already mentioned, but they do he does backdoor access there too, so you can interact with them while they're recording, which is cool. You can also do that on the Never Daily with Sam and Chase. I don't do that with mine because, again, I write my script out pretty good. I mean, a lot of it is improvised. I'm not going to lie. I get the facts in there, and then I just kind of digress and make inappropriate jokes and comments to try to bring a little bit of levity to a terrible situation. But sometimes you have to, because this is like super serious and it's terrible to talk about and think about, but you have to have a little bit of a way to break that up because it's real. It gets real dark, like depending on what you're looking at with stuff like this. I really got to find something a little bit more uplifting because this episode was a bummer. Not going to lie. I mean, the last one was fun where we talked about some like Crusades era Assassin's Creed stuff. That was pretty neat. But I've kind of hit I feel like this is the villain arc year, is season 2. Because this is the second and third horrible person that we've talked about this season. And judging from my list, I've got a couple more before we end the season. I mean, one's fun because he's like an old-timey gangster. So, I mean, yeah, he's a bad person, but he's not like a Nazi, right? If you want to support me directly, I have a Ko-Fi. It's ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. Any donations there go directly to me to help with like upkeep of the show, replacing equipment, upgrading equipment if I have to. Like I said last time, at this point in time, like in my journey as a podcaster, my stuff is like the best it's ever been. So, and I've been doing it for coming up on a decade at this point. But it'll help me find some more cool stuff to put on the wall or buy books to do episodes on. If you're just throwing that out there. Or maybe a bookshelf to put my pile of books on, even though I've still got like 6 more boxes of them in storage. I haven't opened since I've moved into my place. But anyway, we're all gonna die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world. Just don't do it like these ones. Okay, love you. Bye.